Earlier in the discussion, my first question, I guess, is who here is an FBI agent? Anyone? All right.
I'm just kidding.
All right, my first question is, where do you get your news from? Pretty simple question. CNN?
Media.
Where?
Social media.
Social media mostly? And do you follow like CNN, Fox, or nothing like that? Do you have perhaps a independent media source? Maybe some people working at home, or
Yeah, his mother.
his mother? All right. Anybody else? Where do you guys get your media from?
Russia Today.
Russia
Yeah.
Today.
And Al Jazeera.
There's a fair amount of truth coming from those sites.
The International Committee for the Fourth International.
Oh yeah, true. You get it from the Trotskyites.
All right. Well, so what I wanted to document today was just kind of what I'm seeing developing in internet subculture communities is the rise of independent journalism. And I guess I wouldn't consider myself a journalist per se, but I had a lot of the same, I want to get into my coming to liberty story because that's kind of what everyone shares, but what I'm noticing and why I've decided to start being active online is because I was really frustrated. I had the same kind of frustrations that I hear sometimes from libertarians or liberty types, anarchists, and you feel crazy sometimes. You feel super isolated. I didn't know anyone in person that was into liberty or anarchy or economics or anything like that. And I had kind of a slow, gradual evolution, and I'll get into that. But what I decided to do is I'm a big listener of the Tom Woods show, and he is always like, hey, start your own blog. I have these blogging resources. You can do it in 20 minutes. You can have a blog up and running. And my wife is here with me, and she can attest that I get passionate about liberty. I like to talk about it a lot, and I like to badger my friends and family about it a lot. And they get irritated with it. Exactly. And so I decided, hey, Tom Woods has this blogging thing. I rant enough as it is. Why don't I start a blog? And so I did that in the summer of 2016 with the Tom Woods deal. And I was going to project it, but if you go to libertyweekly.net, I know we all have devices here, you can see the work that I've done over the past year. It started as a blogging site, and I put hours and hours and hours into it. I've lost my whole archives due to web hosting mistakes and stuff. But it's kind of developed, and I think about a year after, so I started it in July of 2016, and then it was in May of 2017 that I had a friend who isn't here today, but he is the one that introduced me to liberty, and I'll probably get into that. But we started a podcast, the Liberty Weekly Podcast. And in so doing, I was able to meet this entire hidden network of podcasters and independent media creators that are working right now to try and spread our ideas and to provide, other narratives and to have conversations. And I've made friends in what's called the Libertarian Union, is a little network that we've made together of independent podcasts. And that's at libertarianunion.com, is a compendium of all of our sources here. And it's been super rewarding. It's been a lot of fun. I've met a lot of friends that I think I'll have for the rest of my life. And I've been able to reach some people. And I think I have, as of today, it's been about a year, I have about 200 downloads of the podcast per episode that I put out for every 2 weeks. And so I had a jump start from Tom Woods. He gives me a shout out and stuff. But I've been very proud of that. It's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and extra time. But what I wanted to do without getting too grandiose is talk about my own liberty journey, but tie that into parallels that I see within the American Revolution. And this isn't about me, it's more about people getting together, agorist tactics, and kind of just deciding, let's do it. What are we waiting for? Let's do what we can. And so my story is kind of, I won't dwell on this, but I'm a classical liberal type. I worshiped the Founding Fathers growing up. I'm from the Republican side. My parents are very conservative. I grew up very conservative. I've changed my views on a lot of things, obviously, but it was through that classical liberal, Lockean, Founding Fathers, Thomas Jefferson, that brought me to the ideas of liberty and to Ron Paul and my co-host, which I mentioned before. So I had this progression of being interested in liberty and knowing that that was paramount to my beliefs, but also discovering people. And I remember the first time I read Anatomy of the State, and I wish I could read it again and again and again and again for the first time, because it blew my freaking mind. And I wanted to bring this to other people. So then, as I alluded to, I got evangelical. I started preaching all the time, and I think people got sick of it. So I turned to the online sphere. And one thing I realized once I started consuming other liberty podcasts, such as the Dangerous History podcast, which is given by, and I think he's a bigger fish than I am, but it's given by a history professor, and he is a Rothbardian, and so he'll go through and debunk everything that you learned at public school about history. And one of the biggest things is the American Revolution that I learned was totally different than what I had been taught in school, even with the Founding Fathers' worship, because it's a true shame that the American Revolution is so cloaked in statism, because there were really two revolutions, and this is the meat of my talk here today, is that there was the revolution that we all learned in school that was led by the Founding Fathers, Thomas Jefferson. It was anti-federalist and federalist alike. But these groups were the oligarchs. They were the opinion molders, and even though they had a liberty bent, it was in their own best interest. And they wanted to, some of them, I think more so on the federalist side, I'm thinking Alexander Hamilton, Samuel Adams, John Adams, they wanted to create a new order, same as the old order in the United States. They wanted to do that, and they cloaked it in liberty because, that was popular at the time. I don't want to say they didn't believe in liberty, but where you really get down to the meat of it, the real American Revolution was led by people just like you and me. There were the leaders, the opinion molders, but the real meat and potatoes of what happened was led by farmers and small landowners and pamphleteers. And this is one thing that you kind of get in the mainstream, is the story of how pamphleteering really led the American Revolution. One thing I didn't realize was that the American Revolution, in the American colonies, almost everyone was literate. Literacy rates were super duper high. And what we had, and I'll make several analogies to the Gutenberg printing press here, but what we had essentially was pamphleteers and the wide dissemination, a very literate audience, one that would interact. And I want to draw parallels between this pamphleteering and the level playing field that the internet can provide. Someone like me, I have these ideas, I get a $60 microphone and an internet connection, and you can talk to anyone all over the world. I've had downloads in Russia. I've had downloads in South Africa. I've had downloads in Norway, Sweden, Australia. I've made friends in Australia. I've discovered the Brazilian Libertarian movement. And this is that pamphleteering, except on steroids and supercharged. And so to get back to the American Revolution, you have pamphleteering. Obviously, you have Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which is the most famous one. But you also have pamphlets coming from nobodies, and some of them weren't exactly as good on the same level as Common Sense. Some of them were rambly and ranty and stuff like that, but people had a voice. And so there was that aspect. And one thing that Prof. CJ talks about in his revealing the true history of the American Revolution was that the role of evangelical Lutheran firebrand pastors all up and down the colonies, I think mostly centered in the northern colonies and the middle colonies, and I'm not getting into the religious aspect of it, but what they did essentially was you had firebrand preachers in a decentralized grassroots process preaching the ideas of liberty. And we're talking firebrand here, like the streets will run with blood, to protect our rights. And there's a lot of iconography tying this to God, and it's your God-given duty to protect your natural rights. Well, we know natural rights, they either come from God if you're Christian, but they come from your humanity otherwise. But there's this decentralized process all up and down the colonies, people on their own terms preparing for the revolution. And that is what he talks about and what I wanted to tie into. But you can see this because you can go back and read what people were writing and saying at the time. A lot of what Prof. CJ talks about is this idea that there was a population boom that happened in the colonies in the middle, like the 1750s, and by the time the real revolution was coming around, there was an influx of young people between 20s and 30s, and a lot of them were landowners, and they were farmers, and they had this, it was tied to religion, but they had this firebrand idea of natural rights that they were very passionate about. And in their speakings and in their writings here, I wanted to get the exact thing that Prof. CJ said, is that their writings were angry, they were very fearful. They were very fearful and protective of their liberties, and they were very passionate, and they were very well armed. And in fact, there's this great book, let's see, I forgot the name of the book, but these pastors became known as, quote, the Black Regiment, because they would go about, stirring up trouble, just talking to people about the ideas of liberty and having this spread. And you see a lot of this idea of liberty being tied up in culture. And I think a lot of people talk about this. If you're in the podcasting world, listen to podcasts. Dave Smith talks about how politics is downstream from culture. And this comes from Andrew Breitbart too. And I think that's true to an extent, but I won't get into that. But you see this in the American Revolution is the very reason, just the existence of the colonies and the fact that Britain had a whole empire to run. They kind of left the colonies alone for a bit. In the beginning of the 1700s, and then you have basic home self-rule setting up shop. And then the French and Indian War happens, and the British come in, and they're trying to protect the colonies from France, and then they realize, hey, we let these colonies just evolve on their own here. Well, now they got to pay up for having us protect them from the French and the Indians in that war, so things got a little bit heated. But from that laissez-faire, leave them alone kind of home-grown up situation, you have, I think, what we're looking for, which is a natural, decentralized buildup of these feelings and emotions, and them being propagated through the leveling of the playing field that I think is paralleled with the internet. But you really get that evolution, and I'll return to this theme of pamphleteering, people writing, people being active, and people expressing their thoughts on their own terms, and this idea of radical libertarian preachers that would talk about firebrand natural rights. So, and you have this theme emerging, and what Prof. CJ talks about in his episode, of people acting before any of the founding fathers did. If and I should have been exact on the dates, but you have the Lexington and Concord happening, and this was a result of all of these things coalescing, this network of liberty circles being activated, and them responding on their own terms, and them declaring their own independence with their action. Before any of the founding fathers wrote the Declaration of Independence, they fought, and they were more successful at it. And one thing he gets into is the accuracy and firing rates of the Colonial militias actually being much higher of the Continental regulars, or of the British even, because they were set up to fire in area firing. So you line all your soldiers up and they just shoot in the general direction. Well, the decentralized, these young, radical libertarian landowners who were well armed with the modern equivalent of a kit, like an actual army kit. They had, in some ways, they were armed with Kentucky rifles, which were actually better than the British. And so you get the targeting of officers and just the fighting of the guerrilla warfare style that we've come to know is very successful. This idea of insurgency that we've seen play out time and time again in, ironically, U.S. foreign policy, where we'll go, blow the hell out of Vietnam or North Vietnam, and we can't beat farmers with AK-47s. Well, it's played out in Afghanistan for 17 years. We can't win. And Prof. CJ talks about this idea of parallel revolutions, and on the one hand, there's the one that I've been detailing this whole time, but on the other hand, there's the oligarchs, and everyone who's waiting around to declare independence, and has already done so with their deeds, is waiting around on the founding fathers, and they get all the damn credit when it was everyone, all the people of the colonies, who declared independence with their actions. And it's on the military end, but on the home front too, the children, the wives, men who weren't in militias or had served their time already, I hate the word serve, but who had fought already, there was huge agorism going on and counter-economics and the boycotting of the British and the, you hear of tarring and feathering tax collectors and stuff. Well, that was a huge part of the American Revolution too, was the counter-economics. And in a way, that also contributed to the end. But Prof. CJ also explains how the militia was much better, and in fact, the founding fathers, especially George Washington, was inept and a failure as a general in very many ways. And in a lot of ways, well, we'll talk about the Green Mountain Boys in Vermont had their own separate rebellion and kind of rebelled a little bit against the colonies as well. But in many ways, you see the great-grandfather of Robert E. Lee was a figure who could have rivaled Washington. They could have picked him, and he was a lot better at these militia tactics and actually, terrorizing the British. But he kind of gets snubbed, and they go towards this oligarchical George Washington setup, and then you get, the founding mythology and stuff like that. Well, that's not reality. And just trying to.
Was the general that got snubbed?
It was Robert E. Lee's grandfather. What was his James?
Yeah.
But I would point everyone to that series by Prof. CJ because he's just amazing. And
he actually told that the reason why he got in trouble is he told Washington's face that he almost destroyed the army with stupidity in Trenton, New Jersey. And so then Washington, of course, couldn't take it because he couldn't take any criticism.
He had an ego. A bit of an ego. So you get that, and that's an awesome hidden history, actually. And Prof. CJ details that so well, better than I can. So you get the mythology being cloaked, and to speak more towards that, I lament the fact that the revolution is so tied up in patriotism now, and the 4th of July is in the sense of, status worship. But what we really should be celebrating is the defiance of common everyday people and people contributing to this cause. And I suppose, and they were ballsy about it too. And it doesn't end with the signing and drafting of the Constitution either, because that spirit still remains even through the Alien and Sedition Acts, and that gets through the history of nullification in the constitutional history. And I think one thing that's really brave that isn't talked about is Mr. Madison, John Madison's war, the father of the Constitution, the War of 1812. You have militia groups, I think it was in Maine or some of the northern states, independent militia groups who sat down and said, no thank you, we're not going to invade Canada. We signed up to defend, Vermont. We don't want to go. And it's that bravery that we're looking for. And and I'll get into this when it ties into, and I don't want to be grandiose and try and compare myself to the American revolutionaries or anything. I'm talking about us, people like us. And what I see is people, instead of banging their head to people that they know in their real lives, trying to convince people who will never get the ideas of liberty, have your own voice online. Anyone can do it, and I really want to encourage everyone to do it. And I've had a few friends who have decided to, I'm just going to write a blog. I'm angry about gun control or something, to pick a good topic that's precedent right now. But, get a website, have your own voice. You can reach thousands of people. And I wanted to highlight in the end here just a few of my friends who have done so. And I don't have my projector here, so I'll be throwing a lot of URLs at you if you want to check out these people. But specifically, a good friend that's doing this is a guy named Mance Rayder. And if you know of the Game of Thrones reference, that's his moniker or his publishing name. But Mance Rayder does Free Man Beyond the Wall podcast at freemanbeyondthewall.com. And one day he decided, hey, I'm going to write a book. And so he went on Amazon's Create Space, and he created Waking Up, Freedom Through Memedom, the 31-day guide to waking up to liberty. And I think it rose to number 8 on the Libertarian books in Amazon. And, next thing you know, he's on with Tom Woods, he's on with Dave Smith, he's on with everybody, and he's just a regular guy, and he'll be the first to admit that. So he writes a book about memes, he has a very successful Twitter account, and he does a show, and he's talked to Scott Horton, he's had everybody on the podcast. And and then there's other friends that I have who have started what's called the Front Range Voluntarist, and I think it's at frontrangevoluntarist.com. But I just checked and the website is down, so he publishes the articles on Steemit, but I've submitted some of my law school papers to the publication, and they've been printed there. So it's an online publication, but it's also available in print in I think some places around Denver. I don't know if it was some of the other, I can't remember which place he was from, but it's available in print. So that's some things that people are doing. Like I said, I have my friends with the Libertarian Union podcast circle, but some of my other friends that do work are Kyle Ancelone, and he's at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, LIBSYN.com, and he debunks the war propaganda. And he's just another guy, with a microphone, and every single day he'll talk about, or 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, he'll go through everything that's going on, all the people that were killing in the Middle East, and all the people being killed in the Middle East, and debunking the war lies and the propaganda. And I think he had a big thing on the Russian dossier, and talking about there's this girl in Iraq, the Syria girl, the little girl who's tweeting about, please come bomb my country to save us. All her scripted crap, and that propaganda, and just learning about the conflict, and my friend Kyle does Foreign Policy Focus. It's on the Libertarian Institute too with Scott Horton, and you guys actually, awesome, yeah.
Where I see his posts is on the Libertarian Institute blog.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so Kyle's a real good guy. I've done a few shows with him, and maybe you can attest. He's a hard worker, man, and he knows his stuff. He's read all this, and he can bring it to you in 30-minute podcasts 3 times a week, just so you know what's going on, all condensed into that information. I have friends trying to win the culture war with actualanarchy.com, and they're out in Seattle, or they're out in Washington, and we've become good friends, but they do movie reviews from a libertarian anarchist perspective. So they get into that banter and stuff like that. We have a lot of good time. But I suppose one thing, this is a lot of work. I'm not going to sit up here and tell you that having a blog or a podcast or something is easy, and I'm not going to tell you even that people will want to listen to you, because even getting attention from people is a sludge in of itself. But it is so rewarding. You meet lots of really good, fun people, and I think that the parallels. Oh, and I forgot to mention Trey Weaver was supposed to give a talk here today, but he got sick. But he does Subversion webcasts, and he's in the Twin Cities and even Prairie here talking. He started talking about music and liberty, but he branched out into general interest. So lots of good people. There's a lot more that I could stand up here and plug all day long. But I suppose I just wanted to say, we don't have to just sit here and take it. We can do things, and I'm not going to say, you having a podcast or a blog or anything is going to change the world, but it might make you feel better, and it might actually reach people. And if you have a podcast, people kind of come to you with open ears because they want to hear what you say, instead of you trying to shove this down their throats and them not reading a book or something like that. So the internet gives us these opportunities, and as the curtain is pulled back and Oz is revealed, more so, I think that's what we're getting with technology. There is the surveillance issue that I've talked about, and how scary that is, and what social media is doing to people's psyche and to their emotion, and just destroying that. And it's manufactured outrage. But there is something we can do, and spread the messages, and to make that parallel with the pamphleteering in the American Revolution is trying to see the other American Revolution, not the one that's talked about all the time, and to try and emulate all those brave people that you don't read about, that really did make a difference, and that were the actual mechanism behind achieving liberty and the American Revolution. So I think that's about it. And I really appreciate you guys coming out today, especially with the snow and everything like that. Hopefully it doesn't get too bad. So I suppose I'll open this to discussion if you guys want to talk or ask any questions.
Well, I'm glad that you framed the discussion in terms of also not only what our beliefs are, but what is the political system right now, and that is, oligarchical control.
Yes.
So I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it's it's scary and it's kind of depressing. But I think, speaking from my own experience, I was feeling exasperated, and I think that's something I identify a lot in people, is that they're just fed up, they're just done, they don't want to talk to people. And I'm guilty of that too, But I can pontificate all I want on my own show. So, yeah.
What are you finding maybe 2 questions, right, about podcasting, because I guess I'll don't commit me to anything, but I'm actually thinking about cranking up podcasts.
Yeah. Everyone should have a podcast.
And so the 2 questions I have for you is that, which topics are you most, that make you the happiest, make you the most pleased about what you're doing, and what make you enjoy it the most? And then secondly, which may be something completely different, what are the topics, what are the things that actually you get the most feedback and the most positive feedback from your audience?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so the thing I like doing the most, although I'm a 3L, I'm a graduating law student from Mitchell-Hamlin here in the Twin Cities.
What area practice?
I'd like to go into criminal law or personal injury, or I'm talking to some. What I'd really like to do is a think tank and work in policy and write policy papers and do this on the side. I have 2 in mind, but I like to. When I started out, I wanted it to be about law and libertarianism in the law and the common law, roots of trial by jury, and and that's what I get the most feedback from, is any episode about Lysander Spooner, people go crazy because he's a rock star kind of, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of him. So I try and do that, and I'll get a spurt of new subscribers and stuff when I talk about Lysander Spooner. And I'm doing a series right now. I started a series on trial by jury and jury nullification, and he has a lot of great things to say. But I have to say the most rewarding episodes that I've done have been ones with foreigners, and because I get to I've made good friends with a guy from the Netherlands named Thijs, and he's also a law student over there, 2nd year, and it's uplifting to know that there are like-minded people all over the world, and that they agree with you, that you're not crazy, that these are good ideas, and another one that I did is I made a friend from Brazil who just reached out to me on Facebook and said, hey, let's talk about the Brazilian libertarian movement. And I think while they're a little more Hoppian in their persuasion, they're good. They're solid, laissez-faire, Misesian economists, and there's a network of Brazilian YouTubers out there. There's like 10 of them, and they have tens of thousands. I think some have hundreds of thousands of subscribers, and they're just dudes that go up and they record themselves talking, and they spread that information. So while I like to do episodes on my own, I had a series called Thought Crime Thursdays about I would talk about dystopian fiction and tie that in, and I did one about Philip K. Dick's A Scanner Darkly and the Afghan heroin trade, because I think there's parallels there. But so that's been a lot of fun, and just meeting people is really cool. Seeing that there are people all over the world that believe this stuff. Is that about it? Any discussion?
So you touched upon this a little bit, but what's like one of the most effective ways marketing and getting more people to listen to your podcast? You talked about like Lysander Spooner. Are there other examples of of that, of getting, spreading the word? Or
well, I'm still answering that question.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's hard, man, and to get people to listen to your stuff, it's like trying to market your own fiction, It's hard, and I'm still answering that, but I would say live Facebook videos. If you get into the live streaming game, or all about your forum. So what I'll do is there's a bunch of ANCAP groups on Facebook, and then every episode I come out with, I share it to those pages, and that's been the most effective way. But otherwise, connecting with big names, or just connecting with someone that has a little more followers than you. Another good way is to give them something, like Mance Raider, he made this book, and all of a sudden now he's all over the place and people talk about him and know him and listen to him. So another good way is memes. People love memes, and you can kind of discredit. You run a gauntlet with it, because on the one hand it can be a little unprofessional because there's shit posting and stuff, but they're so effective. Like the 10th Amendment.
That's what people have the attention span.
Exactly, and it's memes.
Things get a lot, but it's very
at
the same time.
It's like a mini sermon. You can convey your purpose right away, and that can get into as well social media and how I think it's destroyed. Because I notice I'm a terrible person when I'm in social media, and this the podcast has had the dual the benefit of having me have this outlet, but also the detriment of making sure that I'm on social media. And you get outraged, so you know what I'm talking about. So anything else? Yeah.
So earlier, I'm a student in school right now, but earlier you were talking about how there was like two sides to the war, right?
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm a little confused on, because I learned a little bit about that last year, and I'm just like a little confused on like how do you spot if something's wrong about it?
Oh, that's a good point.
Oh, logic? Yeah, taking some logic classes. There are free logic resources on YouTube as well.
Or if the soldier has an American flag, they're working.
Well, are you talking about the American Revolution?
Yeah.
Oh, specifically.
Yeah.
The war with Revolution.
Well, I don't think that it's as much as, you do have the people who will heap praise. It's more of what they don't tell you. So instead of, because a lot of the mainstream stuff, I suppose, wouldn't be inaccurate. It would heap praise upon figures. You get into this with the Civil War and Abraham Lincoln too. But what they don't tell you is that Lincoln imprisoned a whole bunch of journalists, and he fought this unnecessary war and instigated it. I think The Real Lincoln, Thomas D. Lorenzo, is a good book for that. But I guess I would point to the Dangerous History podcast, because Prof, he has a reading list too, and one of them documents it. So you never heard the story of Robert E. Lee's grandfather. I didn't either. They don't teach you that in school. So I suppose it's the blemishes they don't want you to see, and the caking over of makeup on personalities that don't deserve it.
There's nothing like, if I could jump in just to suggest, because I've done a lot of revolution. None of this is hidden. It's all there. It's just that if you rely on secondary sources and people will tell you this is what you ought to know about the revolution, well, then you'll miss stuff, right? But if you go to the primary sources, they're all there. For example, really quick, go to Wikipedia and look up the Battle of Jumonville in English, and then also go to French Wikipedia and go Battle of Jumonville. Now, if you don't know French, you'll have to Google Translate the French Wikipedia article on the Battle of Jumonville versus the English one. You'll be amazed how different the story is. This is where George Washington essentially started the French and Indian War by assassinating a French diplomat, right? So the English version is, it wasn't his fault and everything else. The French version is a lot different. And so things like that, it can be very eye-opening because, if you look at the world from the perspective of America, you're going to get a very narrow view of the world. There's another 7 billion people that don't think about us like we think about us. That's just a good tip.
Well, you just made me think of things they don't tell you about. I guess another one of my favorite topics that I've done has been exposing the eugenics behind behind progressive economics. And you throw that at someone who isn't progressive and they just really don't know what to do with it, because there's a guy named Thomas C. Leonard who's a Princeton lecturer who has written a book that I'm reading now about eugenics and the American progressive era, and it is awful. The things that these people say that are under the Wilson administration, especially the Bureau of Labor Statistics saying that the minimum wage is to keep the unfit out of the workforce.
Yeah.
And I mean, the real history is right there, and it's not a secret. They just don't tell you about it.
It's total. There is no conspiracy. It's right in front of you.
Yeah. So you just gotta open your eyes and look. And yeah, so I guess the big story is I want to have bigger guests on, but I just have to nut up and do it, because you see people like Brian McClanahan or some of the staff from Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom. They're available. People in our movement are available, and I'll decry leaders all day long, but they're available. They are leaders. They're doing important work. And you give them an email and you schedule them to come on your show, and a lot of them would love to do that. So if you like their work, you can help facilitate its being spread. Cool. Yeah. So thanks again, everybody. I really appreciate your attention.
Thank you.